I've got a special program for you today. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about when design inputs go wrong. Let me share, before I dive too deep today, we're going to go for about 60 minutes. We'll have some Q&A at the end. So as we go through today's session, please feel free to jot down your question, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during today's session. Just let me tell you a little bit about Greenlight and why we put on these webinars and training sessions. I'll tell you personally, I care very much about trying to help improve the industry, trying to help provide education and information. I've sat in the seat that many of you are in today, and I know what it's like to be a medical device professional, whether that's a product development engineer, quality manager, or regulatory specialist. We are faced with some significant challenges within our roles, and we're just trying to look for the right thing to do at the right point in time, as simple as we can, while ensuring that what we're doing is still going to help ensure quality and safety and improve the quality of life that the patients who will receive our products are going to have that best, highest quality possible. So I know you're all looking for ways to work smarter, to be more efficient with your time, and frankly, that's what we do at Greenlight. If you'd like to learn more about Greenlight Guru and our EQMS platform, I would encourage you to go to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation. You can learn a lot about how we're helping companies, medical device companies in over 600 cities from over 50 countries ditch their paper-based approach, their old legacy software, for a modern quality management system that has been designed specifically for the medical device industry by actual med device professionals. So again, go check that out, www.greenlight.guru. So let me give you a little background about myself. As I mentioned, I've sat in seats similar and roles similar to what many of you are doing today in your various companies. I've been in the industry now for well over 20 years, started my career as a product development engineer. I worked with companies like Cook Incorporated. I've done work with quality systems and regulatory submissions and strategies. I've done a lot of work for startups, companies like Theron, consulting businesses like Matrix. I've worked with a lot of companies of all shapes and sizes, big and small. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic today, when design inputs go wrong, because I think this is an opportunity that we can all help improve our design and development efforts. You probably have also seen some of our content contributions at Greenlight Guru. We've been published on many industry news sites such as MedCity News, Med Device Online, Quality Digest, and more. Also encourage you, if you haven't already, go check out the #1 podcast in the medical device industry. That is the Global Medical Device Podcast. You can find that again at the Greenlight Guru website. Now, without further ado, let's shift gears and let's talk about what happens when design input requirements go wrong. So, as I mentioned, I should have, I guess, advanced the slide, but you can learn a lot more about Greenlight Guru. Here's some things that some of our customers have said, and we're all over the place. You can also go check out more about Greenlight. There's third-party review sites like G2 Crowd, Capterra. You can see all about Greenlight Guru, as well as learn about our different workflows within the system. So as part of today's presentation about when design input requirements go wrong, I'm going to go through some common design mistakes, talk about some of those challenges. I'm going to use some examples today. Some of them are medical device examples, some of them are not. Anything that I share with you today, it's not, this is my opinion, this is my thoughts, this is based on my observation. So, you know, I have a couple of examples of some things that were done well, and maybe some that could have been done a little bit better. My intent behind this is really to point out the importance of design inputs as we go through this information today. I do think that defining good design input requirements, there's a bit of art to it. Of course, as technical folks, there's a little bit of science to it as well, but I want to talk a little bit about making sure that we become good design input artists as part of our endeavors. Design input requirements so important for the products that we're bringing to market. I do have a real life example case study that I want to share with you today. Again, it's something to just think about as we're going through this, and then of course Q&A at the end. It's been a while since I've read a Dilbert, but a lot of engineers seem to like Dilbert cartoons, and I found this one. This was specifically about product requirements. I think sometimes when we're thinking about the requirements of our product, there's kind of one of two extremes that I see. One extreme is that we are hesitant to document anything, or we bury information in lab notebooks. The other extreme is we go overboard and we over document some things. So do consider there's a balance here. And as I mentioned, I'm going to go through some examples of some different things today. These are just some things that, food for thought, if you will. Like the left, the aerosol cans made by the same company, same color. Obviously, you can read on the label, one means something or has a very different purpose than the other. But if you thought you were getting the black and gold canola cooking spray and instead you had the fly and insect killer, that might not be a very good experience. I'm sure we've all sat in movie theaters or maybe on airplanes where it seems like there's that battle for the armrest. There's always that middle one that, where you kind of fight over it. But, why doesn't each chair have two armrests? The classic door example, the push-pull, sometimes the handles or the way the door is structured is you're not sure if you're supposed to push or pull. Um, and I know, nothing against Apple here, but I actually have one of these Apple mouse for my computer. It's crazy to think about how you charge it. Your mouse becomes non-functional during that process. So think about design as how you think about it, how you consider it is important. And I think it's really important as medical device professionals to understand that as well, because we've got to consider the environment and where our products are going to be used. It could be you have a device that's used in an ICU and there's all sorts of things going on, all sorts of other gadgets, devices, equipment, bells, alarms, displays, all sorts of things happening. And if your product is just going to be added to that mix of chaos and it starts making a noise with all these other things that are out there, that can not make life simpler. It can actually make it more confusing and more challenging. So we have to consider a lot of things when we're defining and designing our products. We have to think about the use of the device. We have to think about the environment that it's going to be used in. We have to think about a lot of different scenarios. There's an example a few years ago. Labeling is important for these products as well. And this example from a few years ago, it was kind of it became a little famous because there were some Hollywood stars and their children who were involved in this tragic event. But like the labeling on your product, if it is not clear, the dosage or the size or the level of medication that's in a particular product, for example, there's a big difference between 10 units per ml and 10,000 units per ml. And if you get one confused for the other, then this could have very, very serious ramifications. So we have to factor all these things in. It's important to consider everything about the design of your product, including that label, including that instructions for use, including that operator manual. As I mentioned, there's a little bit of art to this. And the little bit of art goes into you really trying to understand what is going to be included in this product, who's going to use it, and those sorts of things. Before I dive too deep into some of the art, it's important to think or to realize that there are quite a few different terms that are used somewhat synonymously with one another. And if you've been a part of these conversations, sometimes one person may use one or more of these terms in the same conversation. So it's really important to understand what we're talking about. Design inputs, design and development inputs, design input requirements, sometimes just requirements, design requirements, product requirements. Sometimes I've even heard requirement specifications. So if you're not entirely clear what the person is referring to when they use one of these terms, just ask them to take a pause and to explain what they mean, because these are topics that are important to make sure that we're in sync and on the same page. So why are design inputs, why are they so important? Well, they're so important because, well, I think they're the most important part of the design and development process. FDA has said this, It's been pretty clear in a lot of other presentations on design controls and from ISO and GHTF and so on. But if you think about it, this is where you define all the things that your product should do. And eventually, at some point in time in your project, you're going to be verifying that the device you came up with meets your requirements. And a good way to think about design verification is that it is proof or evidence that you've designed the product correctly. And so if you are going to have to demonstrate that you've designed the product correctly, then having a solid, robust, complete, comprehensive list of design inputs is going to be pretty important. Design inputs, they're going to drive what you do from a product development standpoint. They're going to shape or influence how developers will design and develop and interpret your product. It doesn't matter if it's a mechanical device or electronic device or software. The design inputs are key to that development effort and eventually key to that product that you're going to bring to market. Realize too that design inputs are sort of that foundation of your project. As I said, it's the most important part, but design inputs are connected to your user needs. Design inputs tie to your outputs. Design inputs tie to your verification. So it is that foundational piece of your design and development effort that's going to hold everything together. I do like to talk about this diagram not as a prescriptive way of doing product development, but more from a relational perspective. This shows the connection of how your design control details tie together. And just pausing. So apparently I've been talking and my screens are not advancing. So thank you all so much for your patience today. So I hope you all are able to see this view now. So I apologize for that. So if somebody could confirm that you're still seeing the slides, that would be helpful. I apologize for the technical details here. All right, sounds like there's some working fine, so appreciate you all saying that. So, all right, so as I said, I like to talk about this waterfall diagram, not as a description of a product development methodology, but more of really showing the relationship of your entire design and development process. You know, you start your whole development efforts because of an idea that you have or a clinical problem that you're trying to solve, an unmet opportunity, if you will. And so you start to define, an indication for use or an intended use for your particular product. And that really starts to shape helps you define the user needs, what's important to that clinician or to the healthcare provider, what's important to that patient who's going to be receiving your product. And then this is key to define or to identify or to understand, because that is invaluable intel that your product development team is going to need to help to shape the requirements or the design inputs of your product. So just understand that relationship. So sounds like I'm still having some challenges with my screen sharing. So let me try to do that again. All right. So when defining design inputs, expect this to be iterative. I mean, this is not a challenge or something that you're going to do one time and expect to be perfect at it. This is going to be an evolutionary type of process. This is going to be something that you're going to start with something. Some of the things you may know right away. You may know that it has to be a certain dimension or length in order to access certain part of a patient anatomy. Other times you may have to say, I don't know the details on this. I'm I know it's got to have some certain flow rate or some outside dimension, or it's got to be a certain size font, or it's got to respond in a certain way, but I don't know the specific information about that. That's okay. You can say something is to be determined, or you need to do some additional work or research to explore that. That's the whole point, is to use your design inputs as kind of a scratch pad as you start to define what's important about this product, and use this as a guide to help you determine where you need to focus time, effort, and energy. I think another thing to consider as part of this continuation, or the continual process of defining design inputs is uh, is to really understand that there are potential risk of your product. What could go wrong. We don't like to think of negative things, of course, but factoring in risk management into this process early will help shape the design and development of your product as well. So let's continue on. As I said, I've always been a big fan of trying to make prototypes. You may hear about, sometimes you hear like agile methodology, uh, like this concept of MVP, minimally viable product. I think that notion is it's kind of a good concept. I may build a prototype, a crude prototype. Maybe I can just grab some things that I can glue together or twist together or tie together or whatever, but I'm using it more from a conceptual standpoint to better understand what's important about the device. And prototypes are ways that I can help define that. And I should be working with others on my team as well. But really what I'm trying to do through this entire process is I want to capture everything that's important about the function, about the performance, about the safety of my product. I really want to understand this. And I think sometimes we get trapped or caught up in, especially for inventors and entrepreneurs. You might be the person who came up with the concept or the idea. You might be the key opinion leader. You might work very closely with a key opinion leader, and that's terrific. It's all fine and good. My word of caution there is, don't just take the key opinion leader's word for it. Don't just take your word as the inventor for this. Try to cast a little bit of a wide net. And the time to do this is during the design input process, because this allows you to capture information and to iterate and evolve and make changes early in design and development is easier, it's less time consuming, and it's certainly less expensive. Think about the alternative. If you get a product where you're in V&V activities and you start making changes to the requirements, very expensive time to do that. Or even worse, you launch the product into the marketplace and now you start making design changes. Those design changes could have ramifications from a regulatory perspective. They could have ramifications from a manufacturing perspective. So consider the importance of trying to be thorough, complete, and cast a wide net. The other thing to factor in with design inputs, certainly there's a regulatory factor as well. Understand how your product is going to be classified, understand what indications for use you're claiming. You may be even understanding if there are predicates that are involved, but having a good handle from a regulatory perspective will be key. And for some types of products and in some markets like the US or even outside the US, there might be standards or guidance documents that are specific and relevant to your product. And those standards and guidance documents may have criteria that you need to factor in as part of that design and development process, and you may need to capture those as design inputs. So understand that as quickly, as soon as you possibly can. It's like I said with the waterfall diagram a moment ago, it's really important to build upon those user needs and indications for use. This is, you've got this idea for a product, you've got some problem that you're trying to solve, you're trying to capture what's important from the patient perspective, from the end user perspective, and remember, from an end user perspective, this doesn't just have to be the doctor or the nurse or the patient. It could be, the purchasing person at the hospital. There might be certain things that person has from a user need perspective that is important about the way a product is packaged or the way it's labeled or things of that nature. So consider that. You may have to think about the shipping resource that you're using. Like, for example, if your product has lithium-ion batteries, contained within your product, there might be some special labeling that you have to include on the shipping containers of that. So it's important to understand that user doesn't have to just be the patient or doesn't just have to be the physician using your product. So, be as thorough as you can on that. Another key thing about design inputs, clear and objective. It's common for things like user needs to be a little bit more vague, a little bit more ambiguous. Things like it must be easy to use, but that's not sufficient when we're talking about design inputs. Design inputs should be stated in a way where you can verify, where you can prove or disprove them with objective evidence. When we get to verification downstream, then that's important to think about from how we fashion or how we define our design inputs. You got to think about how you're going to verify a design input when you're defining that design input. So if it's not stated in a way that's clear and objective and unambiguous, then that's okay. Iterate, build a prototype, learn something, run an experiment, gather more intel in order to better define what that needs to be. And don't think about design inputs in a way that requires that you have to do all of your design inputs. All of your design inputs have to be at the same stage so before you progress. I mean, yes, there is some order of operation that is important. It's really hard to verify, in fact, impossible to legitimately verify that your output meets your input without first defining your output. Your output is going to be hard to define without first defining your design input. So there is an order of operation, but it doesn't have to be all design inputs. It certainly has to be from a horizontal perspective. You have to make sure that those things happen in the right order. So both, I'm sure you all are very aware or probably know just as well as I do that these things are defined in the regulations. So design inputs are part of the design control regulations in 820.30, happen to be subpart C. But basically, this defines the rules, if you will, from an FDA perspective of what a design input is. As you can see, it talks about you have to address incomplete, ambiguous, conflicting requirements. It's about making sure that the design requirements are appropriate and address the intended use. So you see that connection to those user needs and to that intended use. You also will need to have mechanisms in place to make sure that your design inputs are reviewed and approved by the appropriate resources within your organization. 1345, 2016, very, very, very similar to 820.30C when it comes to talking about design and development inputs. Again, functional, performance, usability, safety. You can see this is all articulated within the standard. Regulatory criteria, to tie into risk, that's important as well. So key things. There was a couple of other places that I would point you, really good resources. One is the FDA Design Control Guidance. It's a 20-plus-year-old document, and it's still, in my opinion, very relevant, very appropriate, very applicable 20-some years later. Very good document. But you can see it talks about the idea of risk management begins with the development of design input. So there's this relationship between the risk and the design control process. These things are really very much joined at the hip. They're very much connected together. So use one to help you with the other, and it just will make your product safer, more effective, and mitigate risk throughout the entire process. The design input is quoted as being the starting point for product design. So having a solid foundation of requirements is going to be the most important thing that you do from a design and development activity, absolutely, without a doubt. And another source that I would point you to is you go to the Greenlight Guru blog. We have a ton of information, all free for you to consume. The Ultimate Guide to Design Controls. We have several pieces specifically about design inputs. We've done webinars on the topic. We've done podcasts on the topic, but please consume all of that. Now, 30%, what is that all about? There have been many sources that have cited that 30% of your development timeline should be dedicated to defining your design input requirements. I mean, I guess I'll pause for a moment. I just encourage you to think about this. how many of you are actually spending 30% of your time defining your design inputs? If your experience is anything like mine was early on in my career, it's usually more of a mad dash. We're trying to hurry up and get through this particular phase so we can get to the next one, so we can get to the next one, so that we can submit and get clearance and so on and so forth. It's like a race. And I look back at some situations in my personal product development career where I'm not sure that the race paid off. I think if had I spent a little bit more time doing some things, it would have resulted in fewer design changes post-market, or fewer issues or challenges in manufacturing. So, is this number 30% an absolute? No, by no stretch of the imagination. But it is important to realize that 30% is a pretty good chunk of your overall project. So are you, if you had a project that's going to last 3 years, 30% is almost a year of time. Are you going to spend a year's worth of time defining those design inputs? Uh, I would encourage you to spend the time and understand how important this is, because as I said earlier, getting it right at the front end and spending a little bit extra time on the front end is going to save you time. It's going to save you challenges downstream. It's better to spend more time being diligent about the process earlier on versus being in VMV or post-market and then having to make changes, because those changes are costly, they're expensive, they're consume a lot of resources. Um, as I shared earlier, it's important not only to think about the labeling and the use of the product, but it's also very important these days. A lot of products, I think, when we think medical device, the common environment that we think of might be the ICU or the with a physician, but there are a lot of products. In fact, this is probably one of the fastest growing markets, is the home use products. And today lines are being blurred between smartphones and smartwatches and medical devices as well. So we have to consider the user population and making sure that the user interface is appropriate for that population, and make sure the instructions are clear as well. So you have to consider all the use environments. And as I mentioned earlier, but it's worth repeating again, if your product is going to be used in the hospital environment, in the ICU, in the OR, there is a lot of stuff going on in that environment. And it's very important to understand how your device interfaces with other products or within the environment. Is it going to create more clutter, more noise, more challenges, or is it going to make life simpler and easier? I have to factor all these things in. So where do you get design inputs? What are all the different sources that can help you with this? We already talked about the user needs. This is important. This is the main feeder, if you will, to your design input requirements, are your user needs, stated or unstated, known or unknown. It's best to document your user needs and use this as sort of the primary feed into your design input process. So that's a key thing. Other areas where you can capture or identify specific sources for defining design inputs: industry standards. I've worked on a lot of catheters, a lot of electromechanical devices, a lot of wound dressings, different kinds of products, and a lot of these products have standards that exist, whether those be ISO standards or ASTM standards or ANSI. A lot of information is out there. And I know FDA's done a lot of work to build consensus recognized standards databases. I know there are ways to search for this information, but do a thorough job in trying to identify possible standards that could apply to your product and technology. Sometimes regulations are there and have information in them that are also a source of your design inputs. Regulation may cite a specific guidance document that is applicable to your product. That's information that you should think about as well. It's also key to think about other products that might already exist, whether they are your own or some competitor, or maybe even a product that's used in a slightly different application in a different industry. That can be important information to use as a source for design inputs as well. We've talked a little bit about the end users, but end users can tell you a lot about the product, and they can tell you a lot without always saying words. Sometimes you can put a product or a prototype into an end user's hand even early on into the process, and just watch how that person interacts with your product. You'll hear a lot of things that that person will share about their experience, but your eyes will observe a lot of things that you learn and pick up from that process as well. So if you have an opportunity to engage end users into your design and development process, and doing so in a way that can help shape your design inputs, I would encourage you to do so. I've talked about prototypes and the role that they can play as well. I mean, there were many times where I would get a prototype from a doctor or a cocktail napkin sketch for an idea for a product. And one of the things I wanted to try to do is get hands-on, kind of get conceptual, figure out how the parts and pieces that I was going to need. I would scour through our existing products and see, okay, is there anything that seems similar in nature or indication for use, or similar in shape, design, function, and format. And I was trying to learn a lot, but I oftentimes found myself doing some quick and dirty prototypes just to try to see, how is this thing going to work, or how is it going to play here, and what about the connection point here? Just really insightful to really reduce your idea to practice and use that as a means to continually evolve your product is important. So, how does one become a design input artist? There is a little bit of certainly science that is involved. There's some technical ramifications and aspects that you need to consider. Um, I think companies get themselves into trouble when they look at design and development, design controls, and design input generation as a singular person activity. It shouldn't be. It should be a collaborative team effort. Should be some cross functionality built into this as well. So I would encourage you to bring in multiple perspectives, multiple different disciplines as part of that process. Again, you're trying to establish design inputs that are clear and objective. You're trying to establish design inputs in a way that you can measure, improve, and demonstrate through activities like design verification. You need that to show that this thing's safe. You need to show that this thing works, and one way to do that is to have clear objective criteria in order to do so. You want to show the continuation or the traceability or the linkage or the relationship throughout the entire design and development process. You want to show that flow, how your user needs evolved into design inputs, the outputs that resulted, the verification that results or demonstrates the outputs meet those inputs, and then the validation that ties it all back together and proves that the correct product was designed and developed. This is a kind of a classic cartoon. I'm sure many of you have probably seen this, but there is some truth to it, depending on your lens, that sometimes the words get in the way. Sometimes we hear what we want to hear. And I think the way to avoid some of these challenges is to build that cross functionality and to iterate, to pull in your end users as part of your process. So that way you don't go through trial and error only to find out that you missed the mark completely. So just encourage you to be very cooperative and collaborative in nature. All right, so I want to get into a real case study, an example. Again, I'm not supporting or not supporting any of these products that I'm sharing with you. I'm just providing you personal observations from some experiences and from some friends and family going through this process with real medical devices. So peanut allergies. This is a very common thing these days. My girlfriend, one of her children has a peanut allergy, and her daughter actually has one of these devices. This is an emergency epinephrine device. If you have exposure to peanuts, depending on how sensitive your allergy is, you may have to use this device in an emergent situation. Now, this product, the interesting thing about this product, my girlfriend has two of these, and the she was told that the reason she was given two is because one of them, the extra is in case one of them fails or you misuse it or you don't know how to do something. So that's a kind of an important thing. They also have test devices that are they don't have any epinephrine in it, but they're kind of test devices. And I want to play this short video and just have you observe this. All right, so I, that device is used in an emergency situation. Uh, in my personal experience or case, uh, my friend, her daughter is 13, and would she, how does she know when to use that? Would she know how to do all those steps? Um, I think we have an awesome responsibility as medical device product developers. We have to consider how the product is to be used, who's going to be using it. My good friend Mike Drews from Vascular Sciences and we've talked about this topic quite a bit, both on the Global Medical Device podcast and just through our conversations. But a medical device should be pretty intuitive, hopefully as intuitive as possible to the end user. They should know what to do. Uh, and I'm not sure if I had a peanut allergy and I had that particular product, I would know what to do. There's a lot of steps that are there, and it's a high stress situation when I have to use it. So um, I don't know. It just begs the question of could we do more to improve that product? And I guess I would ask you, did design inputs go wrong? I don't know. I learned about this particular device a few years ago, and let me just play the video because I think you'll find a different experience here. All right, so two very different design approaches for essentially doing the same sort of indication or intended use. Um, I mean, I'll just ask you, which device makes more sense? Which one is more intuitive? Like I said, it's just an example, but it's something to really think about as we're going through this product. We have to make our products as simple and easy to use as we possibly can. So at this point, I would like to open the floor for questions. Again, I apologize for some of the technical challenges. I know you're all a very patient audience, but let me ask the audience a few questions or see what questions we have. So, all right. So Andreas asked, what I find challenging, John, is to make sure that the design input requirements actually capture user requirements, which typically are more generic and less tangible. Yeah, it's a very big challenge. It's one that I think it's a, it's not so important to get too hung up on that, to be quite honest. I mean, think about that continuation of the process. You know, you've got this idea for your product. You want to try to capture. I mean, the way I do this is first, when I have this idea for a product, I try to think about, at least at that point in time, how I would imagine or envision this product being used. I want to think of maybe, from the moment that I would ship the product to point of use. I want to think about the moment that it kind of leaves my control, if you will, and where it goes. Does it go to on the shipping, the logistics truck, and then it arrives at the incoming dock at a hospital? Where does it go from there? Does it go on the shelf in some inventory? Does it get pulled by some nurse, or what is the journey, if you will, of that product from the moment that it leaves my door all the way through the point in time where it's going to be used, all the way through the point in time that it's going to be disposed of? Those will help me think about the things that are important from a user need perspective, and help me think about, again, the design inputs for my product. So, just realize that user needs are going to be a little bit more vague. They're going to be a little bit more ambiguous, and that's okay. When you get to the point where we're starting to formalize and define your design inputs, it's going to be a little bit more clear, a little bit more objective in nature. All right, so Braden asked, one of the things we have struggled with is the distinction between user needs and design inputs. Absolutely. So, Braden, hopefully that last response helps provide you some advice. Karen asked, most of the design and development SOPs are based on the waterfall model. How can we write a design and development SOP based on the agile model? I've noticed that small startup companies do not follow the waterfall model. They go for agile. I'm not sure how agile development changes how regulatory department can structure the SOP. This is a wonderful question. I thank you so much, Karen, for asking this. The interesting thing about this, if you read the 1997 design control guidance from the FDA, it talks about an iterative approach to product development. And iterative approach to product development very much aligns with agile methodology. So I think a lot of people have a misconception that in order for you to comply with regulations when designing and developing a medical device, that thou shalt have a waterfall approach to doing so, and that's myth. That is absolutely not true. As I shared a little bit earlier, there is an order of operation. Let me describe that. You cannot verify until you define your design outputs and your design inputs. You cannot capture your design outputs until you define your design inputs. So there is an order of operation, but that's not to imply that you have to have 100% of design inputs before you can define any design output. You can iterate. You can do this in a very agile way. Like, your product may be comprised of different subsystems, or may have different components or different features, and some of those may advance at different times, different schedules. A good example to kind of wrap your head around on this topic is an electromechanical device. Electromechanical device is going to have probably some printed circuit boards. It may have some embedded firmware. There may be a mechanical enclosure. There may be some UI software that's involved. So the electronics is going to progress at a different rate from the mechanical enclosure, from a different rate from the firmware, from a different rate from the software. And you may have completely different resources working on each of these different components. So if you were to follow a purely waterfall approach, that would imply, hey, I'm not going to do any work on my outputs until all of my inputs are ready. And that it's just not pragmatic. It's not the way that product development of any kind should be. It's not the way product development in medical device should be. And no one in the regulatory world is going to dictate that. And if you find some regulatory body or agency or resource that says thou shalt do waterfall, I'd be happy to have a conversation to point, to have a conversation about that and point out where that's just not supported or corroborated within the regulations. if you look at like some standards like 62304, yes, it is a software development standard, but it does describe more of an iterative agile approach. You can read the Agile Manifesto. It's not specific to medical device industry, and it's not restrictive for medical device industry either. But a really great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So Simon asked, do you capture manufacturing environment requirements, for example, clean room, class, XYZ, in design inputs? If not, where do you capture such a requirement? This is a great question, Simon. My short answer is yes. I think if that criteria is important for your product, if that cleanliness or clean room type of capability is important, then yeah, I think you should capture. I think a good point here is I think we spend a lot of time focusing on the design input requirements of the device. I'll guess I'll ask you the question, or what do you think about defining or spending just as much time defining the requirements of your manufacturing process? So there's some time that you should be spending to define this type of criteria, and if it's important to the end use of that product, uh, to specify or define the details of your manufacturing environment, then yes, I absolutely would encourage you to include that as part of your design inputs. All right, so Mark states, good advice on using end users. Just heard about a design on a tube used during infusion that changed materials that shouldn't have made a difference until a complaint by an end user showed that they normally squeezed the tube and the new materials were fragile and broke. Engineers would have never used that material had they known about this activity ahead of time. Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. And now they have a recall, new material search, whole new biocompatibility testing, and complete revalidation of the new design as a result of not asking the right questions up front. And I don't know what that's going to cost that company, Mark, but it's a lot, and not just a lot in financial, but a lot in their perception of are they do they have products that are going to have challenges? Are they seeing the information that's important to the product? Or do they get those end users involved in that process? So, seeing a lot of comments here about not being able to see the screen, so not being able to see the videos. So I apologize that folks are seeing that. Man, I had a lot of technical challenges today, folks. So I appreciate you all being patient with me, but hopefully you were able to hear some of the audio from that. Let me see next questions here. So, all right, just a lot of video comments. All right, so this comes from Roberto. What is the best way to organize different levels of requirement specifications? For example, hardware, software, opposed to system level, software level, or both? It's a good question, Roberto. And my advice is to try to organize your project according to how the work will be done. And I'm glad you mentioned hardware and software. And that's a really good example. If your product has hardware and software, chances are you have different resources who are working on the hardware versus those who will be working on the software. So a natural way to organize that project might be to split the software and hardware into subcomponents or kind of mini projects within the project, if you will. That would be a good way to do that. But I would encourage you from a project management perspective to organize the work according to the resources and how efforts are going to be done. Of course, there will be points in time for these things to come together. So this is the benefit of a good, solid design and development plan to describe those interfaces and those interactions and those resources when design review should happen and so on. So good question. Mike asked, how important is it to seek input from KOLs outside of the company? For example, surgeons. Does the FDA consider this to be important? Mike, I think it's very important. Regulatory opinion aside, I think it's super important. Sometimes I think people take the KOL or the end user involvement as 2 points in time, once at the beginning to kind of kick things off and once toward the tail end to assist during design validation. And if that is your view or your approach and involving KOLs, key opinion leaders, and end users, then I think you're missing some opportunities. I think there are opportunities to engage KOLs throughout. And while KOLs do provide invaluable insights, sometimes the key opinion leader is, while you want them out there eventually maybe speaking about using your product and doing case studies and things of that nature on your device, just remember that in most markets, the key opinion leader kind of represents the top tier of that end user population. It might be also good to get the opinions and feedback and input from your average everyday user. So just keep that in mind as well. But I would encourage you to do it throughout the process. I would put a lot of weight in earlier stages, like when defining user needs, when defining design inputs, when trying to understand the actual hazardous situation and possible harms that can result. Those key opinion leaders, those end users can be invaluable to you during that process. All right, so Jamie asked a question: can I start a project with a design input, later testing notice that it would not be feasible or cost effective, and later remove the design input item? Jamie, yes, you can do those sorts of things. The key thing will be I guess first question I would ask you and to consider is, what type of testing are you doing to notice whether or not it's feasible? If it's verification testing, that might require some more, I guess, diligence, some more formality in how you go about this process. If it is just some benchtop early feasibility testing, sort of informal testing, if you will, there's still a need to document and capture your decisions that you make. But yes, you can do these sorts of things, but just make sure that when you remove something that you have an explanation or a justification for why that is not important. This is where good documentation practices and methodologies will be helpful to you. And of course, if you need more specifics or thoughts about this, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on screen. So Keith chimes in: the diagram from FDA guidance isn't a waterfall, it's a relationship between artifacts. Absolutely, Keith. Thanks for that clarification. I think it inappropriately gets named the FDA waterfall design control diagram, but it is, as Keith points out, it is a relationship between information. David, how would you incorporate predicate product specifications from previous products? What is your process? Do you reevaluate them? All right, so David, I'm going to have to speculate a little bit on your question here. So if I know that I'm going to go down a regulatory path that's going to leverage a particular predicate or maybe multiple predicates, sometimes I have the opportunity to get hands-on with some predicate products. Sometimes I don't. But what I want to try to understand is, I want to understand how that predicate product is being used. I may be able to understand from their instructions for use the steps that might be involved with that particular product. I may be able to talk to an end user or a key opinion leader who has used the predicate device and get their perspective. Another invaluable resource that I think sometimes we don't think about when defining design input requirements is like databases from FDA. Like, you can look at MAUDE, for example, and see, does this predicate device have any sort of adverse events or issues that have been reported against it? And if the answer is yes, then that might be something that you want to build into your product from a design input requirement, so it doesn't happen with your device as well. So a lot of different ways to do that. And I think, if you are going down that predicate path from a regulatory standpoint, there will be some things that you'll need to do to demonstrate substantial equivalence to that predicate device. So, there are probably some things that you're going to be doing, whether it be some sort of test or some sort of analysis to compare your product to that predicate device. Good question. All right, so Jim asked this is a lengthy question, so bear with me, folks. On a slide 29, design inputs should be stated in a measurable way. Does all design inputs need to be measurable, or is verifiable a more accurate description in some cases? Really good point, Jim. Verifiable is really what we're going for. I guess it doesn't technically have to be quote measurable, but you definitely need to state it in terms that it's verifiable. So really good. Thanks for pointing that out. Very helpful. All right, so Sierra asks, do you have advice on how to search for industry standards for a specific medical device? Well, Sierra, as I'm sure you're well aware, the medical device is a very ambiguous generic term in and of itself. There are some places to go. Your question is not lost on me that this is a challenge at times. There are databases for standards. I know our friends at Eisner Safety Consultants, have maintained different databases for different device standards, so that might be a good place to go. I know you can also go to the FDA website. They have a database for recognized consensus standards. It is having been through this activity myself many times, this is not a trivial thing to do. Um, um, it's a hard answer to give you, a black and white answer, at least today, but Sarah, if you would like, send me a note. I'd be happy to kind of talk through and point out some things that might help you. All right, quite a few questions here. Folks, thank you so much. And again, I know I've had more than the usual technical difficulties today, but I appreciate your patience and your thank you for your tolerance to this. But let me get to a couple more questions. And folks, if I don't get to all of your questions today, which there's quite a few that I am not, please, if you want to interact and engage and have a chat with me about design inputs or anything else design control related, or you want to learn a little bit more about Greenlight Guru, please go ahead and send me a note. You can see my email address on screen. You can reach out to us at www.greenlight.guru. All right, so Dan, you got the honor and the pleasure of being the last question today. So Dan asked, what are the ways we are handling medical device development in a startup environment is by starting with our intended use and defining needs around that. We realize there is somewhat of an agile process for design inputs, but we are assuming what our assumption is we will keep impact to develop, minimize if we avoid changing our intended use. Yes, okay, so if I understand what Dan's saying is that intended use is important in trying to identify what that is sooner rather than later, and more or less sticking to that throughout the process will be to your benefit. If you keep changing your indication for use and your intended use of your product, you'll have to go back and sort of revisit your user needs and your design inputs over and over and over again. So really good point that Dan makes. All right.